Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good morning. Welcome everyone to this online public lecture. We are indeed delighted to have Yang Berbahagia Emeritus Professor Datuk Dr. Osman Bakar, who's from ISTAC-IIUM, and also a guest discussion Yang Mulia Tengku Datuk Dr. Muhammad Azzman, Shariffadeen Tengku Ibrahim, Chairman, Board of Directors, Universiti of Malaya. I'm Mohamed Muhammad Adil, the moderator of this event. On behalf of the organizers, IAIS Malaysia, International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC-IIUM, Angkatan Belia Islam Malaysia, ABIM, and Persatuan Kebangsaan Pelajar Islam Malaysia, PKPIM, I would like to welcome everyone to this very important and interesting public lecture and discussion that we're going to have this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, despite its detrimental effects on the socio-economic and political fabric of global society, the COVID-19 pandemic has instigated once again the long-standing debate regarding the encounter between religion and science. The current debate started with the publication of an article entitled "Corona, Our Debt to Darwin," written by Pakistani physicist and intellectual activist Pervez Hoodboy. In the article, Hoodboy restates the long-standing polemic denouncing the relevance of religion or tradition within any scientific enterprise, particularly in the current pandemic context. In response to this article, renowned Malaysian science philosopher, intellectual activist Professor Osman Bakar, in a published article entitled COVID-19 and Darwin, a response to Pervez Hoodboy, argues that Hoodboy's blanket denunciation of religion is itself without any scientific basis. Neither does it help Muslim scientists in their search for guidelines within their region for inclusive scientific culture of benefit to humanity at large, as Hoodboy's main argument is that humanity's only hope in dealing with the deadly COVID-19 virus is to appeal to Darwin's evolutionary theory of natural selections, which denies any divine intervention in creation. Prof. Bakar's response interestingly highlights the shaky ground on which Hoodboy's Corona-Darwin link is based. So in this forum, IAIS Malaysia and the other co-organizers is honored to have Professor Emeritus Datuk Osman Bakar to discuss the religion science discourse in the COVID-19 context. And we also honored to have Yang Mulia Tengku Datuk Azzman, Shariffadeen Tengku Ibrahim, a renowned scientist and system thinker, as a discussant for this topic, to shed some light on how Darwinian-based mindset have impacted our social lives, such as in the field of leadership and management. Ladies and gentlemen, so before we pass the presentation to Prof. Osman, so during the presentation, followed by the discussion by Yang Mulia, if you have questions and you have comments, you can share it in the comments of our Facebook IS Malaysia. With that, I would like to pass over to Prof. Osman Bakar. Over to you, Prof. Osman.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and very good morning to everyone. Thank you very much, Professor Azam, for inviting me to make this presentation this morning on the subject of COVID-19, issue of science and religion. And good morning also to Dr. Tengku Azzman for agreeing to be a respondent to my presentation.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah. Well, Dr. Azam referred to an article, my article, in response to Pervez Hoodboy. Well, I'm not going to read that article. I'm not even going to talk about that article. Of course, the issues raised in the article maybe will feature in my presentation, but I'm not going to to do that, I think, because the topic this morning is much more general. It's much more general. Here you're talking about COVID-19 as an issue of science as well as a religion. In fact, I would like to think of my conversation this morning with Dr. Tengku Azzman as a conversation on a very, very important subject, much broader. In fact, very, very broad. It is a conversation on contemporary human civilization. I want to see. I would like to see that way this morning discussion. Now, why do I say that? Well, I see COVID-19 pandemic as a civilizational issue. It's an issue of civilization. To say that it is a civilizational issue means that it's very, very all-embracing in a sense. All-embracing all aspects of human life, human civilization are affected by this pandemic. And of course, the word pandemic itself suggests that the problem that we are facing is global in nature. It is not just epidemic, it is pandemic. So the global nature of this issue means that this is an issue of the whole of humanity. Therefore, basically, it is the issue of contemporary human civilization. In a sense, COVID-19 comes along, or the coronavirus and the disease COVID-19 comes along in our time, giving a kind of commentary on our contemporary civilization. It's very interesting, you know, to see these little tiny creatures humiliating humanity, humbling humanity. The effect is so pervasive that one can write about this COVID-19 and the cause of it, the coronavirus, as a commentary on contemporary civilization. Of course, we can ask this question: does coronavirus have a civilizational message for humanity? Question to think about. Does COVID-19 have a civilizational message for humanity? Yes, it had economic message, it had a scientific message, it has a medical message, it even has a political message, and all these things. Then we can also ask this question: is COVID-19 the revenge of nature against humanity for whatever humanity has done to nature, to the world of nature? Well, the word revenge of nature has been used before by many people who have been concerned with the impact of technology and other human activities on the world of nature. I mention this because it is just a book by Farid Zakaria just came out. It's about 10 lessons for the post-pandemic world. And he mentioned the word revenge of nature. But just put a question: is it the revenge of nature? That's for thought. Or a related question, but in theological terms, in religious terms, is COVID-19 pandemic a divine punishment? Divine punishment for human destruction of their only hope, the planet Earth? Planet Earth is humanity's only home. There's no other home for us. And so a divine punishment? Well, some people don't like the word punishment. But if you ask me, is there any difference between the two questions? Is COVID-19 the revenge of nature? And is it divine punishment for human destruction of planet Earth? Well, that's it. it means the same thing, except that one is formulated in a more scientific term, the other more in a theological term. But it's the same in terms of effect, it's the same because divine punishment is operative through some natural phenomena. In other words, God does not inflict punishment in any other way. I mean, it has to be through some natural, some extraordinary natural phenomena. So anyway, we'll go into that. I just want to skip that. Just to what I intended to do was to emphasize to you that the COVID-19 pandemic is a civilizational issue, and I raised those questions. Now, yes, being a civilizational issue, I mean that there are many dimensions, there are many aspects, but for our purpose this morning, for our discussion, we choose only two of these, namely religion and science. Why? Why do we emphasize on these two dimensions? Well, we know very well how close is the connection between science and our contemporary human civilization. Right? But anyway, if I were to summarize that, religion and science are perhaps the two most fundamental dimensions of human civilization. I am claiming that each of these dimensions contributes to the attack. Some you may not agree, but I'm proposing that. Now, if you think carefully, what has been the role of religion? What has been the role of science in putting us where we are, in placing us where we are, and in fact, in inviting this attack by the coronavirus? And we know now, of course, this COVID-19 pandemic is one of the diseases associated with that, but who knows in the future what other diseases that may be associated with that. So this is something also that we need to think about, think deeply. Has religion played its legitimate role? The sense is the raison d'etre, is the basis of existence. What is the role of religion as far as the construction of human civilization is concerned? Did it play the role that it was supposed to play, resulting in the kind of civilization that we had? Then in the same way, we can pose the question to science. Did science play its role in the best possible way all this while? I mean, it has played a role, or there's certain things also that science has not played its proper role as far as the health of our civilization is concerned. So now I go to explain all this. First of all, I would like to just briefly, and then Tengku can respond, and then we can discuss why I consider COVID-19 pandemic as an issue of science, or in what sense we are talking about this COVID-19 pandemic as an issue of science. Well, first of all, let us identify what are the major branches of science that are related to this COVID-19 pandemic, the disease. First of all, medical science. Of course, medical science is very much in the picture as far as our present problem is concerned. But to say about medical science, and I want to read that, what has been the role of the science, and this is certainly one issue that I raised in my rebuttal or my response to Hoodboy, because Hoodboy, when we talk about medical science, he's only concerned with the modern medical science. He doesn't believe that the alternative branches of medical science can play any useful role, any effective role. But whatever it is, medical science as a subject, as a discipline, is trying to understand trying to find the right vaccines to this. In other words, as far as medical science is concerned, it is trying to understand what this disease is all about, how to treat it. Because when we talk about disease, we have to talk about the diagnosis, what is the disease all about, and what are the roots of what are the causes of this disease, and how to respond to that. So it is here, yes, certainly it is an issue of medical science. Medical science is looking for the answers, and it's still in the dark, despite all the optimism, the expectation that soon we are going to discover the right vaccine. No, we are still trying to find one. But even after finding one, still about the the impact, the effect of this new medication on our health. So, as an issue of medical science itself, so much can be said. So much can be said about how to respond to the current COVID-19 pandemic. Then, of course, biological sciences is very much in the picture, especially microbiology. The question of this phenomenon called the virus itself. How much do we know about viruses? Well, the most authoritative, the experts in the field of virology, in branch of virology, all admit, I mean, that science is still in the dark about viruses. Even what is the real nature of virus itself? All right, is it a living thing, or is it a living thing? Is it a non-living thing? That question is still being discussed. Yeah. So we have the statement that made by some scientists that virus is both living and non-living. In other, it has aspects of life, it has properties of life, some, but of course, that only referring to this, for example, the coronavirus that exists in the host cells. In other words, we have very interesting the idea talking about virus as life in potential. The coronavirus, in other words, until it finds the host to receive them as gas, they are not living thing. So they call it potential. In other, life in potential, not actual life. All right, coronavirus only has actual life when it finds some host cell for them to stay. And anyway, what I'm saying is that the issue is still being discussed. Science knows little, but I have to mention about when to what science we mean by modern science. But what about traditional science? I should traditional science, for example, Islamic science or Buddhist science, and so on. They also these sciences, I think, are in a better position to help answer some of these questions regarding the nature of a virus. Because the traditional sciences believe also in the existence of a non-physical world, non-physical dimension of the natural world. That part of the world of nature which is not visible to the human observation, to verification, but there is such a world. One of the world, or rather one of the parts of this world is basically that domain that lies somewhere between physical world, the biophysical world, and the subtle world, in the sense that this kind of cosmology or this kind of ecology admits the possibility of a domain in which these kinds of creatures, what they call these creatures that are not alive in a sense, but have potential life, but they are looking for the right host. Now, in traditional biology, well, say if you want to put it simply, there is, in other words, there is a kind of virus world where they have a connection between that world and the world of plants and animals, because that world, the virus world, is a world in which good and evil intermingle. Good and evil intermingle. Now, how does this intermingling of good and evil be manifested in the world of plants, in the world of animals, for example? Well, this is another issue that that we have, which means that maybe it's a good idea if modern science also tries to understand what is the perspective on these other kinds of non-physical world that has relevance to the idea of, for example, the concept why some animals, or basically according to traditional biology, all animals carry some form of diseases, for example, because in each animal, for example, the good and the evil qualities are combined, just that the diseases are distributed differently in the different species, in different animal species. What I'm saying is that it is time to look into another body of literature about this world of nature, when to understand better about the idea of not only animal but even plant. They carry certain kinds of diseases, and precisely because these diseases are precisely because this biological world has been disturbed by human beings. We have disturbed the habitats of this animal, in the sense that what we have through this we have a kind of revenge of nature, if you want to use that term. All right, another important of course question ecology. So ecology is very much in the picture, that branch of science which is very much in the picture. I want to talk about the scientific dimension of COVID-19. Now, again, being a comparative student of modern ecology and traditional ecology, I would say that there should be a dialogue between these two to understand better about the role of viruses in the ecological web, in the in the web of life, if you want to use the term as used by some people. Viruses play an important role in the web of life, and in what sense that web of life is affected by our development activities, by our so-called civilizational activities. Now, from there I go next. Why an issue on religion? Why is science? Why is COVID-19 pandemic an issue of religion? Well, religion is interested in the issue because of several reasons. Yes. Why an issue of religion? First, because religion is interested in the root of the problem. What is the root of this problem called COVID-19 pandemic? Modern mind is seldom interested in talking about the roots of the problem. This is our problem. The problem of modern human being. We are not. I mean, we don't care about the roots of the problem. We would just want to touch the surface of the problem, because to go to the roots of the problem means a lot, right? So religion is interested in going back to the roots of the problem. So that requires a lot of intellectual exercises, because we understand why we are where we are, right? So this, again, coming back to what I said just now about being the role of viruses and a certain religion, because when we mention the word religion, for some people, that has nothing to do with the knowledge of things. Knowledge to them means how to do things in a certain way. So religion means more as a way of doing things rather than a way of knowing things. So I'm saying that is wrong. That is a side problem. When certainly from the Islamic perspective, religion is not just a way of doing things, but also a way of knowing things. So as a way of knowing a thing, Islam as a religion has something to say about the structure of the cosmos, of the universe, the structure of our natural world, what exists, what sort of creatures exist in the world of nature. For example, just say we all know the subtle creatures called the jinn. Now, in traditional literature, the role of these subtle creatures is discussed in detail. I may mention here Ikhwan al-Safa, the Brethren of Purity. When I look at their works on biology, they talk about the role of these subtle creatures in nature, in relation to plants, in relation to animals, in relation to human beings. Right? So when we talk about the roots of the problem, means we have to talk about these things as well, not just on the surface. So the problem with us is that we are not solving problems to remove the problem. One, we learn how to live with the problem. This is two different things. We learn how to solve the root of the problem, and the other one, we tolerate the problem and then learn how to live with the problem. That's another way of the human response. Now, it is also an issue of to religion. It's an issue of religion because its perspectives on human responses to the problem, how to deal with this problem. It's not for me to talk much about this because what they're trying to do now, for example, our lockdown, our CMCO, and our trying to observe all the personal hygiene. In other words, we are trying to prevent that. In other words, now preventive to play in a sense, religion has something to do also with preventive medicine. This is important. In my article, responding to Good Boy, I did refer, for example, to one article that appears in the Newsweek, which talks about the personal hygiene that was recommended by the Prophet of Islam. In other words, many of the things in the Hadith about the personal hygiene, which are now being adopted by governments, by ministries of health all over the world, trying to deal with this problem. So that's another aspect of religion. So in other words, there is an overlapping there between religion and public hygiene or science. So in other words, religion and science complement each other in the response to this problem. Okay, the other one is perspective on the solutions to the problem. What will be the solution? Preventive medicine, preventive medicine is one thing, but the long-term solutions to the problems, that is another. So I think as far as religion is concerned, the question of human behavior, our own behavior, that's fundamental as a solution to the problem. In other words, it's not just trying to find vaccines, the right vaccines to treat this, while not doing anything about the effect of our pattern of behavior. What I'm saying is that for the long-term solution to the problem, religion offers another view, which in other words, let us look at our own way of life, our behavioral pattern. Did our behavior, did our past behavior, did our way of life in the past contribute to what we are having now or not? I think that is as far as religion is concerned, For example, say that yes, this COVID-19 is in a way is God's reminder to us to amend our ways. Maybe things that we did, a lot of mistakes that we do collectively as a civilization. It's our time that we look at this, and in one, it's a time. Basically, it's a time for us to reflect. We have all the time now to reflect. COVID-19 has shocked us, has in a sense has awakened us from our slumber, and what I'm saying now, there's place for our role for our action, and there's a place and role for our behavior in finding solutions to the problem. Let me conclude my presentation first. What are the lessons for humanity? What is the lesson for us, and what should we do? I think because it's the most important thing. We want to learn lessons from this whole thing. We should not repeat mistakes. Perhaps now we're thinking of something new. But I just want to say that here, the lessons for us is it is important that the little that we speak about sustainable civilization, we need to emphasize it now. In other words, our civilizations needs to be more sustainable, which is a big concept. It's a big concept. We are using the word, but if you want to produce a sustainable civilization, then that concept has to be manifested, has to be reflected in our practical programs, the way we run our society, the way we carry out development, and so on. And related to the human behavior thing, I think it is time that we go for the wasatiyah civilization. In other words, living by the golden mean, not excesses. Our civilization may have committed excesses, many excesses that do not allow our planet Earth to cater to such needs of a human being. So the answer for the future: sustainable civilization and wasatya civilizational life. So thank you for that, for the time. First for our first round, Dr. Tengku Azzman, for my opening up this discussion. So as you can see, I just want to pose questions and to try to think about this, to think about them, and how we can provide details to the response to these questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Osman Bakar. Indeed, it's a very interesting presentation. I think you have taken into the discussion into the what we call it the civilization issue, which I think it affect on this our civilization as a humankind. And I think throughout your discussion, you have shared with us how this region and science, these two fundamental dimensions, complement each other, and that is very, very true. And you have also give examples of your previous writing, to rebut of the Soup Boys notions with regard to that. And I think you also discuss on this, how this, what we call it, the some of the perspective of this lesson that we can learn. I suppose, the past behaviors of what we have among the human beings, and the so-called of the, whether it is a God reminder of what we have done on the mistake. And in your conclusions, if I may, say that lessons that we should take, we should not repeat mistake. And I think one of the things that you point very important is the sustainable civilizations. That will be very important. And one of the things that I think you also mentioned in your conclusion on the wasatiyah civilization. That would be the so-called that important thing that we should embark. I think that would be some of the summary of what I can pick up. But perhaps we would like to have Yang Mulia Tengku, if you may proceed with your discussion on this. Maybe some of the points that Prof. Osman has presented, and also perhaps you can have your own on this. Yang Mulia Tengku, please.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Azam. Assalamualaikum, and to all the participants, and need also thank you to Professor Osman for giving a very cogent, incisive summary of his thoughts. And I'm so glad that he has actually shifted the discussion, not merely to focus on the Mr. Hood Boy's, attack on tradition and science and tradition and politics, but move on to speak about the bigger picture, which is civilizational and, of course, knowledge, the paradigm of knowledge. So let me just say that this conversation with Professor Osman is nothing new. We have been talking about similar topics going back to the 1970s. So I'm glad I'm joining this conversation again because the COVID-19 provides a new opportunity to confirm what we have suspected all along, that the evidence is now before us that we have actually not done nature a good service. Okay, let me start by first saying that I agree very much with Professor Osman in saying that the COVID-19 as a phenomenon is actually to do with the encounter of man and nature, if you like, humankind and nature. And there are many implications which are scientific as well as civilizational. It is not simply one incident to be solved and then quickly forgotten. It is going to be a long-standing affair between humankind and his treatment, or I would say our treatment of nature. Now, the role of Mr. Hoodboy is only incidental again, because I believe that actually a lot of people out there may think like Hoodboy. So we are using this example to illustrate what can go wrong if you follow a certain track of thinking. So I'm not using Hoodboy as just to criticize him, the article to criticize him. It's merely to talk about how we can think through our problems as a civilization. Okay, so let me start by saying what are his actually motivations. I think the motivations are quite clear from his article. For our participants, at least I want to mention two. One is Hoodboy's perceived conflict between tradition and science. I say perceived because it is not necessarily real. I do not believe that most people think there is a necessary conflict. Right? The second motivation is political. His political objective, perhaps to call it, is to shift the balance of power to science from tradition. And again, by using this device, science, to shift the balance, COVID-19, to shift the balance to science, it's also maybe doing a disservice to science, because I will try to say later, this actually claim is not founded upon science. So what is the situation then? He claims that Darwin's natural selection explains the Corona-19 pandemic, as well as explains the microbial host interaction, and therefore the pattern, the pathogen evolution, and onwards, he claims that therefore we can produce drugs and vaccines to counter the pandemic. That actually is a claim which is not founded to me. And I think the scientists will understand it a lot better than people who are not in the field. Right? It's not credible for one thing. It has forgotten the ecosystem view, which again, Professor Osman has actually highlighted. It is not an integrated, holistic view of the causation between our actions on the environment and its results. For example, in this situation, what has happened is viruses from animals have been infecting humans. In this case, bats. From bats, in this case, for COVID-19, it went into an intermediate host, which is still unknown, by the way. And from that intermediate host, it came to humans. And the simple reason is already quite clear. It is because of the loss of habitat due to human encroachment, and therefore it actually enhanced the possibility of transmission. If you take the example in Malaysia, for those Malaysians, a couple of decades ago, we had the Nipah virus. And the Nipah virus happened at our doorstep, our backyard, as it were. That was in Negeri Sembilan. What happened then? Bats were feeding from the jungle, and there were farms close to the jungle. They actually ate the fruits and then dropped their waste into the pig pens. So the pigs ate the waste and became infected. The humans tending the pigs got Nipah virus. So this is a very good example right in our own backyard in Negeri Sembilan. Now, studies indicate that hundreds of potential COVID viruses, coronaviruses, that are already detected in bats around the world, hundreds more, each of which can infect humans. It simply needs a transmission mechanism. Right? The studies are very clear on this. And there's not only one kind of animal and one kind of microbe. There could be hundreds, thousands of others that have potential to infect us. What Professor Osman just called emergent life. Right? Viruses, I asked my daughter, who's a specialist in this, is a virus alive or dead? She says it's dead. Right? I don't know. She's a specialist in this. So emergent life becomes alive when it meets a proper host. So back to the question of, is this scientifically founded? What Footboy is saying, no, there's no scientific basis. Right? Now, let's go on to his other claim that evolutionary theory will explain everything. Well, Professor Osman has been kind enough to actually do some homework. I didn't do it. I actually looked at his paper. There is the traditional evolution has changed actually. There is the evolutionary theory, which is what called the standard, and it's now become extended evolutionary synthesis. I like the word synthesis because synthesis means actually you are including many other, call it disciplines, fields in science. And because of this, they have discovered that evolution is not completely random. In fact, evolution happens due to forces that actually come from the environment to give the best fit for the whatever form of life to survive and to thrive. So based on this understanding of the new evolution, therefore, his claim that Darwin explains everything, I don't think is again scientifically founded. Now, let's try to look at the thought pattern that people like Mr. Hoodboy expresses. I would like to call this the mental model. And this is what Professor Osman said, thought pattern, mental model. The mental model is obviously mechanical, it is deterministic, and of course reductionist. And the objective is to control and manipulate nature. They're very restricted. In the words of Professor Osman, it's actually the way of doing instead of the way of knowing. Way of knowing is only partially. The bigger, the dominant aspect in this treatment of nature is how to manipulate and control, and therefore is the way of doing. So that's what we call technology rather than knowledge. So it is reductionist, and the systems that actually build in this metal model or this thought pattern are not complete, despite the fact that the system they are trying to study are very complex. There are many interrelationships. So in my understanding of the subject, many of the interrelationships cannot be described very well. Some maybe even call it mechanical, but very complex. And there's so many feedback loops in the system, feeding one on the other to produce what we call very exponential growth, very rapid growth. So these are things that sometimes people forget. So when we have a proper system view of the ecosystem, then all the parameters, I would say most of the parameters are taken into account, and we have a better understanding. In other words, what the message I'm trying to put across here is that a reductionist view of the complex ecosystem will actually produce the wrong results, even the wrong results for the way of doing. Okay, let's move on. So what is actually concerned when we speak about life on Earth? Life on Earth is actually coexistence, where all living beings are in balance and in harmony. So any ecosystem, any biologists will tell us, all the organisms there actually protect each other. They safeguard each other's interests. Sometimes some organisms actually make some of their members die in order to allow other species, other parts of the ecosystem to thrive. Otherwise, if you don't allow your own people to die, not to exist, to feed the others, then everybody will die. Every species will die. So at the ecosystem level, this is well understood. Now, how come when it comes to this situation of COVID-19, we have forgotten that simple lesson? That we have imbalanced the system so much that it allows one form of life to become dominant against the interest of another form of life. Right? So the proper scientific perspective is actually to include many kinds of life together with equal right to exist. If we have that kind of science, then of course we have a better opportunity to have a sustainable future. Otherwise, a limited science, which is reductionist, may be useful, may be necessary to some extent, but not sufficient. To use a mathematical term, it is not sufficient to ensure our continued existence on Earth. So humankind now, let's look at what is life on Earth for humankind. Humankind, we believe, has the intelligence, therefore must have special responsibility to protect and maintain balance in nature. That is his, I would say, accountable role. Now, human values, therefore, play a very important role in forming the social organization, not just human beings as individuals, but his human organization, social organization, and that means civilization. That will enable us to actually manage the earth in a way that is sustainable. So Darwin's natural selection on its own certainly cannot solve COVID-19. It is an incomplete knowledge that has to deal with the total ecosystem, including call it other human beings, other forms of life, with human beings taking on a very important role to manage the entire system. So how do we conclude? Let me just say there are actually 5 messages to me. Number one, the assertion that the Darwin's natural selection will solve the COVID-19 crisis has no scientific basis. That's the first one. Number two, by ignoring the natural ecosystem and failing to understand its through mechanisms, through ways of working, and understand the true causes, we will not have a long-term solution. It can be a temporary solution, but it will not last. Number three, humankind's responsibility to safeguard the natural balance and to live with nature, I think is the most important lesson that we can take away from this discussion. And of course, the true motive for the article is actually to create a political divide between the tradition and science, which is unnecessary. And it is the writer's ideological position which we don't have to support. So we don't need to score political points. What is important is the truth. And finally, the fifth takeaway message. What is the basic principle here? It is the COVID-19 crisis is really an ecological challenge. Therefore, we need an integrated and holistic approach that combines both science as well as the civilizational forces that make life possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yang Mulia Tengku.
Thank you.
I think um, there is a technical thing. I need to check what is happening here.
I'm hearing you. No problem.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Yang Mulia Tengku. Okay, for your discussion. I think you have reiterated what Prof. Osman presented before, and you have taken into the piece by Hood Boy. I think there's so many points that you have mentioned. I think, and your conclusions have with that 5 messages. I think that would be the summary of what you have presented. And I think we assure that I think the important, very important. And I think the last point that you mentioned, the basic principles, how this ecological challenge that we must take into the holistic approach. I think that in line with what Prof. Osman presented before. We have a few comments and questions from the viewers, and I think perhaps I would like to take that few questions, and perhaps we would like to have both Prof. Osman and Yang Mulia Tengku to respond. But one would be, of course, there are so many comments. I mean, they're giving a very good time of this discussion. This one question from Brother Imran Shah. COVID-19 is also a creation of Allah. The pandemic has destroyed the civilizations and global economy due to atrocities and sin, associating Allah with others. There is mushrik committed by mankind. Thus, is this pandemic a stern reminder to all of us, regardless of our religion, faith, to revert back to our fundamental reason why we are created on this world? Have you got it clearly, Prof. Osman and Tengku?
Yes.
Okay. Perhaps, Prof. Osman, you can respond first, followed by Tengku.
Yes, I mean, the question is very theological.
Yeah.
Of course, each religion explains what is the purpose of human existence. In the case of Islam, it is very clear. The Quran has emphasized that God has created man and other creatures, especially man and jinn, in reference to that, so that we serve, so that human beings can serve God in the way that God Himself has guided, and that is the general purpose. And of course, God gives also freedom, a certain amount of freedom to human beings. Human beings has free will. In other words, human beings have the freedom either to obey or not to obey, or follow or not to follow divine guidance. So the message, if you want to relate it to this kind of trial, I think the term used by the Quran is a trial, is a test. Of course, the whole of life is a test, but there are big tests and small tests, and this is a very big test, because the test is refers to the whole of humanity. And in the case of Islam, this is very, very important, because Islam is being the last religion. Therefore, it has to take special care in the sense of the messages that came before Islam. And in the Quran, there are, I remember, about 27 verses directly addressed to the whole of humanity. Ya ayuhan nas.
Yes.
So 27 verses. These different verses deal with different aspects of human cooperation, collaboration, and so in other words, the whole message is, you humanity, you are members of the same family. You are one single family. Now, the problems of one branch of the family is the problems of everyone. So Islam puts it, the Quran puts that in a very, very contemporary kind of language, precisely because being the last message from God. So, in other words, Muslims have a very, very important responsibility to approach these kinds of problems, global problems, in the names of the whole of humanity. In other words, it's not a sectarian kind of approach to this problem. How? It's basically, the message is, how can we together, as members of the same family, deal with it? Now, now we have this. COVID-19 is basically, it's a global issue. It's not meant. It's not a problem addressed to one particular branch of the human family. This is a human problem, and humanity can only solve this problem by working together, by knowing together. And it was okay. The questions that I posed in my presentation is now, let us answer all these questions together. In other words, of course, Muslims have also a responsibility towards towards the Muslim community, but I think the important is that the message at the right time. In fact, it's as if that God wants to do the message, I want to bring you together. I want to bring together you children of Adam. From now on, I want you to work closer together as members of the human family. So the problem, the approach should be universal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tengku, do you have any comment?
Yes, yes. I
Yes,
would like
please.
to reinforce Professor Osman's response. There is a certain risk in addressing the question, very good question from Brother Ibrahim Shah, purely from a religious point of view. But of course, Professor Osman has done that. It is a universal challenge to humankind. But I want to reinforce the idea by saying that 50 years ago, there was a study by the Club of Rome and published under the title of Limits to Growth. Actually, it's a systems study, one of the earliest simulations done of how societies grow economically and in other ways. And in that study, it was very clear that there are limits. At that time, of course, 50 years ago, it's not fashionable to speak about sustainable growth. But basically, that's what it was saying, right? You cannot grow forever without destroying the environment. 50 years ago. And basically, what have we learned? So even for the people who do not follow established religions or traditions, they should take heed that what we are doing now, we have done over the last few centuries, has actually created a world that cannot go on. It's not sustainable anymore. We may destroy the ecosystems in such a way that they cannot recover. An ecosystem actually repairs itself. It's self-regulating, it repairs itself. Now, if you destroy the mechanism for them to repair, then of course they will break down. So that's basically the you can look at the book and read it. 50-year-old book is all still there. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tengku. There is one question from Brother Taik Wahab. Prof. Osman, you have spoken truthfully about the danger of COVID-19 to our present civilization. We need to think what course of action to take in order to move forward. I think it's quite broad question. We need to think what course of action to take in order to move forward.
Well, yeah, because the question is very broad, you know. In other words, you know, to answer that, we have to talk about the different things that we need to do in the different areas of life. As I said earlier, this is a civilizational issue.
Yeah.
Every aspect of our life, collective life, is affected. All right. Economics, for example, it has devastated the economy of the past. So how do you respond to that? So economists, people who are in the field of economics, for example, have a better duty to do, can do the job better than the others. But of course, it concerns everyone. Then in case of education, education is impacted by this. Universities are closed, right? In other words, knowledge activities are slowing down. So in this kind of situation, so we need to think. We need to think what we need to do. What should be the future pattern of learning? So in other words, it cannot be the same. In other words, we cannot go back to the same situation that we had before. Maybe that is the lesson that this whole COVID-19 that God wants to teach humanity. In other words, the word used by Dr. Tengku, limited. There are limits to things. In other words, there are things that cannot go on and on and on. Yeah, you have to observe limits. In fact, this is the whole idea of the whole spirit of Islamic cosmology, for example. All right, things exist, they interact with each other. There's an interrelatedness of all things. When you see but interrelated means is to observe also the limits of each. So each creature observes, each creature that God created observes a certain limits in its own reality. That is very important. Of course, human beings being different, human beings try to, in a sense, to go beyond. Somehow, it rebels. Human being like to rebel, against their own nature. Human beings should understand that. I mean, they have the limits to things. But when we make demands on the natural world, demands on things that have their limits, then nature will fight back. Nature, in a sense, will react against that. So, even in the field, of course, the most immediate thing now is the question of to Brother Taib's question. Of course, is how to survive, how to survive from this current problem that we have. In other words, how to solve the problem at the level of medicine, at the level of health. The best that we can do is to observe personal hygiene, preventive medicine, to sustain, or in other words, to go for preventive medicine that will protect us, our family, and so on. That is the best that we can. And certainly, there's no quick fix. There is no quick fix to this problem. There's a lot of thinking needed, a lot of discipline also. Discipline. Are we really disciplining ourselves in dealing with the problem we had? I'm sure many are not. Yeah, many are not observing the discipline. So perhaps the best thing is for us is, if this occasion, this COVID-19, gives us the occasion to discipline ourselves in every respect. Discipline our mind and discipline our behavior. I think if you can do that, we are contributing to the problem.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Osman. Yang Mulia Tengku, you want to respond?
Yes, thank you. This is a very big subject.
Yeah.
So it requires a big answer, but it can be, I would say, simplified. It has to do with a change or transformation. And change and transformation does not refer to the inanimate world. It refers to the human beings that manage the world. So I would summarize only in three words. The first word is learn. Second word is unlearn. Third word is relearn. It's to do with learning. Again, Professor Osman mentioned that, learning. Now, what does it mean? We have to learn from this experience, right? Having learned from the experience, we have to unlearn certain things that we've been doing, the norms, the practices of the last few centuries. Unlearn those things. And then relearn. Create another way of living. That's what we mean. And that changes not just behavior of individuals, but behavior of entire societies and countries, even the world. Does it help?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mulia. I think just in response to this discussion that you have mentioned, and also Prof. Osman, I think you have mentioned in your presentation, yang Mulia Tengku, about this. I think we don't have to go away from this COVID-19. We have, issue with this Nipah virus at our backyard before in Malaysia,
Yes.
and,
Yes.
and taking into the scenario of the pandemic that took place in the world. If you go to the history, in 1928, in that area of time, we have this so-called pandemic of the Spanish flu, and we
Yes.
also have quite a number of pandemic almost every 100 years in the
Mm.
history of the world of humankind. And as you mentioned in your just response on this, how to have this change and transformation as a human being, you have to have this learn, unlearn, and relearn. And how these human beings cannot take the lesson that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has reminded us in the Quran, and also the history of that we learn, pandemic that took place almost every 100 years throughout this. They call it something like, they call it this flu pandemic, and this COVID-19, somehow the people say that is some kind of this coming from this flu pandemic. So what is your response, Yang Mulia Tengku, in that, for
Yeah.
that?
Okay. Let me introduce another term that is very common nowadays. It's called disruptive change. I'm
Okay.
sure people have heard about that.
Okay.
Disruptive change has many dimensions, but in this sense, it is change that suddenly comes upon us unexpectedly from a source that was not anticipated, right? In a disruptive change, you cannot use linear thinking. Okay, let me just say that we can observe over the last few centuries, humankind has actually assumed a world that is what we call Newtonian, which is mentioned by Mr. Hoodboy. Very simple mechanics. Cause and effects are well explained, well understood, and therefore you can always project the future. Now we're coming to a situation where we are in an ecological space where even the variables are not understood, which are the parameters which we're looking at. So the model is very complex. Now, what do we do about it? It's no longer linear thinking that can work. It is actually non-linear thinking. This is where you have to have a combination of different disciplines, not merely from science. It must come from the economics, the social, the humanities, the politics, etc., etc. So it is actually a concerted effort to produce a way of thinking, of knowing that is comprehensive and integrated. Only then can you find the solutions. So I think Professor Osman is saying the same thing, using different language, of course. And of course, you go back to the tradition to find the sources of wisdom, as it were. What are the sources of wisdom? Principles that do not change over time. This is the stable things in human life. And you use those principles as the foundations, right? So this is where articles like Hood Boys do not help, because they actually create a tension which is unnecessary between tradition and science. In fact, we can combine the two once we actually establish what the principles are.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I respond?
Yes, Osman, please.
Dr. Azam, to your remarks.
Yeah.
I would like to bring this up. Yes, it is true that epidemics, the Spanish flu and Black Plague and others have happened before. So this is not new, all right? But there's something new. There's something that is new. What is new And because of that newness also is the most impactful is the interdependence of our world. 100 years ago, the world did not in a sense, they did not appreciate in the same way that we appreciate today. In other words, precisely because the world has become one interdependent, dependent, so we feel the impact much more. If you use the word, we feel the pain. Yeah? We feel the pain in a more marked way, and therefore, in a sense, the lesson will be learned better, perhaps, precisely because of the impact. Yeah, the impact is global. The impact is global, and the scope of civilization affected is total.
Yeah,
I think that makes it different.
Yeah, yeah.
And therefore, taking the human collectivity, the human mind, the collective mind, the collective human mind soul, is the lesson learned is much deeper. I hope, as a result of that. And perhaps if that happens in the future, if our world is going to be more and more interdependent, then the lessons we learn will be much greater.
Okay, thank you, Prof. We have two questions from Dr. Badri. One addressed to Prof. Osman, and the other one would be for Tengku. So I would read the questions for Prof. Osman first from Dr. Badri. Yeah? How does Muslims respond to other scientific trends that attempt to provide counter narratives to the Darwinian natural selection theory, such as the intelligent design theory, which is mostly propounded by Christian scientists?
Okay, that's the question?
Yeah.
All right. Now, since Dr. Badri presents the question giving the impression that there are only two positions. One is the modern Darwinian theory of evolution, or the modern theory of evolution. And the other one is the kind of what is known in the United States as the creationist theory. In America, for example, yes, I could see that people have to make a choice between between the two. Either you go for, in other words, if you don't agree with the modern theory of evolution, then your choice will be the creation theory in the Bible, in the Belt states of America. But from the Islamic perspective, that is not the case. This is I mentioned before in my book, Critique of Evolutionary Theory. The Islamic position is different. All right, it's not a choice between the two, because Islamic biology, classical Islamic biology, accepts part of accepts partially the modern theory of evolution. For example, in terms of the historical sequence, the temporal sequence, that in terms of the appearance of the different kingdoms, different species, starting with the minerals, the world of the minerals, followed by the plants, then the animals appear, and the human beings the last. So in that case, there's no difference between the modern theory of evolution and the Islamic theory of evolution. But on the other hand, the Islamic theory of evolution does not accept some of the things. For example, the question of that transformation of one species into another in an essential sense. And there's also one aspect of the design theory, the intelligence theory, which is accepted by Islam. So therefore, it's slightly different from the Christian perspective, or rather the creationist perspective. Well, I advise you to refer to to my book,
Yeah.
the Critique of Evolution Theory, where I discuss, in a sense, I provide the Islamic position on the theory of evolution.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Osman. The question by Dr. Badri that addressed to Yang Mulia Tengku, how do you see the reductionist mindset has affected other fields of life, such as in the contemporary business and management trends, and how to nurture the systematic view of life in this essential aspect of human life? Tengku, you
Yeah,
get the questions?
yeah. I
Okay.
got the question. Yes, thank you very much. Actually, the reductionist mindset is combined with many other philosophical ideologies.
Mm,
Reductionism, mechanism, scientism, rationalism, all those isms,
yeah,
they come together. They form a kind of, let's just call it the Kuhnian paradigm.
yeah.
Now, that mindset actually arose from a time when human beings, human societies began to understand a little bit more of the so-called scientific laws, the so-called age of enlightenment and the scientific revolution that finally led to the industrial revolution, which is the revolution we are living in right now. So when you have industrial revolution, then industrial way of thinking is very, very reductionist. Even in the situation of the factory, you make human beings behave as if they are part of the machine.
Mm,
So they are behaving not like humans but machine. In other words, you don't expect them to think, but just to do, right? To do in a very set way,
mm,
as it were, what we call, this Ford factory, Taylorism. Frederick Taylor and his time and motion studies. All this is recorded in history 1 century ago. So that mindset has become very, very strong and dominant. But to be fair, the latest developments have nothing to do with that. The latest thinking about how to manage human groups, human teams, human organizations is actually a softer approach. Mainly because of the, I would say, rise of information technology. When we have IT, interaction, communication, sharing, collaboration becomes more important. And this gives a very interesting phenomenon, which is rapid growth. So companies, for example, are discovering that by using human talent, human creativity, human innovation, you can actually make a company even more profitable. That's interesting, isn't it?
yeah.
For every company, you want to make more profits.
Mm,
And you begin to see companies like Google, like Microsoft, Amazon, using all these things
mm,
together. Human creativity, human talent to produce more value. Now, this is a very interesting phenomenon. So, those who are actually following a reductionist mindset of the old mechanical system is now losing ground.
yeah.
So, if you want to survive and thrive in the future, you must create a new kind of company or a new kind of organization which respects human talent, capabilities, intelligence, smartness, innovativeness, creativity, etc. So this is where I think the trend is toward more human organizations rather than mechanical organizations. So this is the trend. And for Dr. Badri, perhaps it is one area you want to move into the future of systems, which is not just technical system, but socio-technical and human systems. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tengku. We have one question from Brother Sayuti. This question is there any religious ethical limit to the science and technology in finding the solutions or cure for this virus? For example, the more controversial methods in developing the vaccine, such as fetal tissue research, genome editing, etc., can be justified in the name of emergency and necessity, that is darura. Perhaps you got that questions, Prof. Osman and Tengku?
Um, is it if I understand correctly, you're asking, I mean, is it all right to practice to invoke darura, you know, in cases where seemingly is contrary to Sharia injunctions, but
yes, yes.
well, I mean, I may refer to the words of Al-Ghazali and answering the question, you know, if it is necessary to save life, right? Then the lesser, in a sense, the lesser impositions, the Sharia positions can be, you know, a question of we sometimes in Sharia, you know, you know very well, Dr. Azam.
Yes.
Sometimes it's not question between good and evil, but sometimes between two levels of necessity, or sometimes between two different levels of harm. For example, between the greater harm and the less harm, you go for the lesser for the less harm. So in other words, that kind of argument has been invoked in the formulation of Sharia laws. So let us see, because anyway, that was hypothetical question.
Yeah.
Why can't we find vaccines that are halal? If you want to use your, you know, your vocabulary. If I understand, your worry, the person's the questioner's worry is that yes, we'll find the vaccine, but some of the vaccines contains elements not halal, something like that. So what shall we do?
Yeah.
I said exercise the principle of you know, of the degree of necessity. Degree of necessity.
Yeah, Prof. Thank you very much. I think from from the lesson that we learned, I think before that we also have these questions, problems of this, whether this vaccine is halal or haram. And I think from the perspective of religion, I think when they found it, the vaccine, it is haram. And for that matter, under this darurah principles, I think it is allowed. But moving on, because of human beings, we learned. And from there, I think we managed to get this halal vaccine. I think perhaps there will be a challenge for the Muslims, especially, inshallah. Do you have any response, Tengku?
No, I would respect the views of the experts.
Okay.
But I agree with Professor Osman.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we are going to have one more. Is there any? Yeah, there are questions here. Okay, we have two more questions. I think I would like to take, because our viewers are very passionate, listening and watching these presentations. This very simple comment, or we call it question, what they call it, from Madam Aisha, from the presentation from both Prof. Osman, also Yang Mulia Tengku, and the pandemic of this COVID-19 that we are experiencing now. She suggests one thing that is very straightforward. It is, we need a global tawbah. That's what she mentioned. Do you have any comment for that? It means it is not only that Malaysians or Muslims that need to have this tawbah, but it is a global tawbah. Any response from both of you, Prof. Osman and Tengku?
Well, it's just a different terms, that's all. The terminology, I mean, we have been talking the same thing.
Yeah.
Global tawbah, global repentance. But repentance only happens once there is awareness. And therefore the first thing is awareness. After you're aware, then you go for repentance. You cannot go for global tawbah unless people understand what the issue is all about. I think to start with knowledge first. Not action first. Tawbah, doing tawbah is only effective if we know really what wrong we have done. So if you don't know what wrong you have done, there's no tawbah. So the conditions, what are the preconditions of global tawbah? I think that's better. I agree. Yes, there should be global tawbah. Global repentance for all the mistakes that have been committed in the name of progress, in the name of development, and so on. This need a lot of information dissemination. We need to, in a sense, to really to have a new consciousness. So what we are hoping is that COVID-19 has opened our mind. So if after all this lockdown and CMCO and all the many hours we spend working from home, we don't learn anything new, then it's too bad. What is it? What is it? What lesson actually? In terms of theology, what lesson does God want to teach us? What does God want to teach us? That question, mind that. So, all right, some people don't believe in God. Hopefully, the idea of this, okay, people think of God. People have forgotten God. Hopefully, because of COVID-19, people come back to God. Now, still the stubborn one, of course. Okay, you still don't want to believe in God, but at least remember your humanity. Remember your humanity, okay? In other words, in the names of humanity, in the names of the goodness of humanity, shouldn't I do something differently in a better way or not? So at least if you don't believe in God, you just remember that the common goodness of humanity, you will not repeat the wrong thing against. It's a kind of repentance, but this one is a secular repentance. It's not religious one, but knowing that human nature still have that compassion and and mercy and wants to learn to learn from the past mistakes. We believe that humanity has that capacity to learn from past mistakes.
Thank you, Prof. Osman. Tengku, do you have anything to respond?
Yes. I commend Madam Aisha, and I would say that I'm equally optimistic about the future of humankind to actually perform our tawbah, whether we are Muslims or otherwise. So in this context, I think the answer also lies in knowledge and understanding. And here, contrary to what some people like the author we're talking about, we need to have more humility, the word that is used by Professor Osman. The first thing is to know what we know. Right? The second is to know what we do not know. The third is more dangerous. You have to know what you do not know, and of course, figure out you do not know what you do not know. That's very dangerous. So we have to deal with all of these issues if you want to perform real learning and real understanding of how to know, really. So I will not limit to any particular religion, but every tradition has its own principles. We have to know how to know. And don't be in the situation we do not know what we do not know. Right? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tengku. There's one last question. I think I want to take this last question by she called her name as Kak Ngah Sheila. We're talking about the vaccines. If we go beyond this halal status of vaccine, but we focus more on this whether the vaccine is safe, and since it should take years to have one, perhaps for the COVID-19 vaccines, we don't talk about whether it is halal or not, but we want to talk about whether it is safe, and perhaps it should take years to have that vaccine. Any comment from Prof. Osman or Yang Mulia Tengku?
Well, it's not my area. I mean, this I don't do research on this. I can talk only in terms of principles. I'm a believer in medical pluralism. In other words, there's no one single system of there's no one single medical system that can claim it has the capacity, it has it can cure all diseases. I would like to leave this open in the sense that all possible avenues to finding solutions to this problem, medical solutions to the problem, by all means, we should do that. I think it's high time that there should not be this kind of sectarianism. While modern medicine is, I have a problem with Hood Boy, because he rejects all medical traditional medical system. He only goes for this modern medicine. We know what modern medicine has done wonders, but also areas where modern medicine has not done well, right? So why not, as in the other areas of thought that we have been talking about, why not also in the field of medical, in the field of medicine, in the field of the medical health, let's have a dialogue. Let's have an epistemological dialogue, epistemological dialogue between the different medical systems who are interested in finding solutions to this problem. Who knows? It is out of this dialogue that we get ideas. We get ideas on how to on finding the right vaccine, the right medication, the right prognosis to our problem. I just can't talk about that because I'm not a medical doctor. It's not an area, but certainly I don't agree. You see that only modern medicine can solve this problem. We believe that we believe in the prophetic hadith, then God sends disease,
and there is a cure for it.
But there is also a cure. And where is the cure? Well, the door is left open wide for us to look for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Osman. Tengku, you.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. The question is also very good. It provides an opportunity for us to, to really paint the proper picture. I'm fortunate that I actually get to mix around with a lot of scientists, and in particular, scientists and non-scientists, humanities people in a university. So I get to talk to many of them. The first thing to note is that a vaccine will be found, inshallah. It's a question of time.
Inshallah.
There are many possibilities, many different approaches, but there will be, again, many vaccines that will come out. Some are more effective than others. But that's, to me, the immediate crisis issue. What does the crisis tell us? It's actually a change in the way that humankind lives on Earth, basically. And fortunately, among the thinkers, people who think, who can project the future, they are quite open to this idea that so many things need to be changed. So it's not just one piecemeal change, vaccine, and this will be solved. It is actually a systemic change towards human living. This is very good. And of course, it is helped by also the global actions being taken. The SDGs, for example, in all the 17, you can see we should put them together. It is a new way of living. And it's supported by the UN, no less, agreed to by all the countries in the world. Why can't we use such agendas to produce a more sustainable living environment? That's a question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just mentioned that will be the last question, but I think that I have to entertain, and this is going to be the last one because this question is very, I think, interesting. I think addressed to Prof. Osman. In the current pandemic crisis, do you see it as an opportunity that will instigate more meaningful integration between religion and science? Prof. Osman.
As a student of the relationship between religion and science, I can see that lately or in more recent years, there have been more and more issues.
Yeah.
More and more issues that bring religion and science together. So the message is clear that religion and science has to work together to find solutions to the problems of humanity, not we shouldn't adopt anymore that attitude of science on its own, religion on its own. Not only that, science and religion are opposed to each other. I think we should base our approach on the premise that religion and science play complementary roles. They strengthen each other in finding solutions to the problem, both theoretically and also at the practical level. So I agree. I believe that this COVID-19 pandemic and the underlying issues, the biological, as I mentioned just now, religious, the public hygiene, and so on, all these areas now where religion, I can see overlapping, a lot of overlapping between religion and science. It's just that we don't access the proper sources, the resources. But resources out there in the libraries and so on. So it's just a matter of opening our mind to these different sources of knowledge about religion and science. Because sometimes we think, oh, we may not think that religion has a role to play in fighting against COVID-19, whereas it has. It's just that we don't know. So we want those who know will disseminate the information, even in the form of questions, problems, and that opens up new research. The same thing, I would appeal to the scientists to have a broader view of things, not to think that this COVID-19 is purely a scientific problem. It is not. It is a social problem. It is an economic problem. It is a religious problem even. It's also a problem with beliefs, about beliefs. So I conclude that let us work on the basis that the religion and science are needed. Humanity needs both of them in solving our problems, not just the COVID-19, but also all the other problems, inshallah.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Osman. Okay, I think with that, we end our discussion today on behalf of the organizers, IAIS Malaysia, ISTAC-IIUM, ABIM, and PKPIM. We would like to thank again both Prof. Osman Bakar and also Yang Mulia Tengku Azzman, sharing with us your valuable time with all the viewers and also answered the questions. And we hope that this series of discussion with regard to both religion and science continues. I would like to thank the viewers and those who have posted questions. And for questions that we unfortunately answer for this particular time, inshallah, we will try our best perhaps to do so in the next platform. Again, thank you very much, Prof. Osman and Yang Mulia Tengku. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.